Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of the culture curve. It's what we do each and every day here on the WDW Pro channel. If you like knowing what's going on with the things that you watch, the things that you love, the things that you want to go see and do, well, click that like button down below. Share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms. When you click it, we're talking about that notification bell. And indeed, we do covet your comments. We actually care. Unlike some channels, we want you to tell us what you're thinking, and we do often engage with you. You are the electricity that makes all this happen, and we are so happy that you're watching today. And what you're watching is part 2 of a series of videos that the Script Doctor and I have elected to do. It started off as one, and we were talking about Superman and Batman and the archetypes that exist there. We had come to the conclusion that it was a worthwhile conversation to have, talking about why these characters resonate so deeply on a fundamental psychological level. When you think about the characters that we pay attention to in pop culture, there has to be something there for us to hang on to. And so when these characters stick around for decade after decade and in multiple incarnations, well, what that means is that there's something to them. There's some reason that's worth digging into, that these characters have a profound impact on the minds of so many. Well, once we did that conversation, I found that that was just, it was one of the best topics, one of the best dialogues and best flows that we've had on the channel ever. And that's really saying something. I know this is a baby channel. We're only, 3 months old now? We're just barely learning how to crawl. But we do about 2 videos a day. And so that was one of the best. And so I asked Script if he would be willing to come back on and for us to dive into something I find just fascinating. That being, how do you write weaknesses into superheroes, and why does it matter so much? And it really, really does. Script, thank you so much for agreeing to come back on the show. It's a pleasure to have you again.
It is awesome to be here again. I had such a blast last time, and with today's subject, I'm expecting to have a lot more fun as well, because there's nothing that really grounds a character and creates stakes than exploring the weaknesses within those characters.
Absolutely. Now, folks, once you finish this video, and you're going to want to watch it the whole way through, but once you're finished, go check in the description. It's below this video. Check that description. You're going to find a link to the previous one. And you know what? If you want to go watch the first one and then come here, you can do that. But it's not one of those situations where that you have to go watch the first and the second. These are interchangeable. So these are different topics. The first one being on the origins of the 2 characters and why origins matter, and now why weaknesses matter. Script, one of the things that I think is most difficult for writers dealing with, contending with the concept of Superman, is that over the years, that character has become almost indestructible, almost invincible, at least with physicality. And so there's a struggle in how do you make villains and how do you make stories around a character that seemingly cannot be defeated? Can you just walk us through some of Superman's powers and some of Superman's weaknesses? And then I'd like to go from there into why it's so important for him to have weaknesses. Just take us into that.
Well, sure. The obvious ones, of course, are invulnerability, super strength. He's got various levels of sight, from telescopic sight to X-ray vision and heat vision, or depending on the type, maybe laser vision. He's got super speed and super hearing. So he's got a lot of tools at his disposal.
Not to mention those breaths he has.
Yeah, and super breath. Yes, he can he can expel a great amount of pressure or coolness when it comes to. It's
fair to say that Superman has many powers that just by themselves would be defining for a superhero. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
okay.
That's one of the things was quite interesting. Is one of the first superheroes that we ever see starts off with more than one power to justify them as a superhero before it's even heard of, and then later on, when other publishers, other writers and creators would do a superhero, they would have this one kind of main central gimmick. Yeah. With Superman, even though he has all those powers, he is still relatively mortal. Like, he ages, even though later on they just said that Kryptonians age a great deal slower than human beings. Another aspect, though, is that when you're dealing with a person that has so many powers and pretty much impenetrable skin, yeah, you are right. It does limit. Well, how do you stop him? And many writers like to always lean towards the physicality, and that's perfectly fine. With regards to his physical weaknesses, the obvious ones are, of course, kryptonite and the spectrum of variations that follow.
Now, was kryptonite always built into the character? When did they introduce kryptonite?
Oh, they introduced kryptonite quite a while into the character, actually, because most of the time with Superman stories, and this is usually how you actually have the universal weakness is always the battle of wits. How much more clever can one person be over another? Because that's where real creativity kind of stems from. And one of the things that Superman had a lot, especially with his opponents, is that they weren't really trying to defeat Superman. They were just trying to get away with whatever scheme they had. And when Superman got involved, they would usually put up distractions. And one of the most common ones is that, and it's one that every person has a weakness to, which is you can't be in two places at once.
Right.
And that's basically what it was. Is a villain would attempt something, Superman would stop him, and then their plan would be, okay, well, if I do something over here that will distract Superman, I can then accomplish my crime here and get away before he can find out what the heck even happened. And that's
clearly the writers of Superman at the time had not yet learned of electrons and superpositioning. Sorry, well, physics joke, everybody.
It could be that. I mean, the other part too is that Superman does predate the concept of nuclear war and radiation and things of that nature. So, so that is also that is also kind of something to consider, because I think it was like maybe 10 years, maybe or so, or maybe longer, because Superman was 1938. I think Kryptonite was 1950 or so.
Gotcha. And then they introduced all different types of kryptonite as well later on. Is that right?
Exactly. The main one was green kryptonite, and that was based on the rumors of radiation poisoning. And that was a great way to sort of exploit a character like Superman. And which means, again, you have 10 years of history of Superman, struggling to various degrees. And
so you might say, Script, that then the development of that kryptonite idea, that is a weakness born out of a national fear of the Cold War. Is that right? That the Cold War was directly impacting this character and impressing upon him the fears of the nation?
Well, I don't know if it's 100% direct, but I would say it's definitely influenced. Obviously, the other influence being is like we need more problems to give Superman on a physical level as well, because as the character keeps having newer issues, and over that 10-year period, he's developing more powers that the writers are doing at this time to either create solutions to problems they have presented, or do something that's a bit more fun.
What does kryptonite do to Superman?
So it's a low frequency radiation that on the surface is harmless to humans, but actually can destabilize Superman's cellular structure, and it usually poisons him. And too much of it turns his skin green, and he gets very, very weakened, kind of like getting like super mono, so to speak.
Like a reverse Hulk, right? He turns green, but he gets weak.
Turns green, gets weak, passes out, and then it just slowly, kills him. And as the decades went on, part of what the radiation did was it would negate the effects of Earth's sun's rays on Superman, so he couldn't process or metabolize the radiation from the sun, so he would be weaker and weaker. The only way he would heal is if you get that kryptonite as far away from him as possible, and then Earth's sun's rays would replenish his cells and revitalize him. He'd be fine. This came about, yes, in one part because of nuclear fallout, but another part is like, well, we really should have something that can affect him. And when you learn more about what radiation does and radioactivity, it's like, oh, well, it can actually pass right through your body and kind of like knock out parts of your DNA. It's like, well, that's something that's so small that, yeah, and there's no way Superman's skin can penetrate that. So that's really cool. And then as they got older, they're like, yes, but denser or higher or low. I don't know if I can't remember if it's a high frequency radiation or low frequency radiation, but like the normal radiation that we would face from, say, uranium would not affect Superman. And then also they started playing in with the fact that he has a weakness with regards to lead in the fact that he can't see it because it's such a dense material, he can't see through it. And that
Oh, I
also
see.
ended up
Yes.
being his protection from kryptonite. And in addition to kryptonite being one of his weaknesses, another one was just really immense brute force that could be on an equal level to Superman. So if he could punch, say, 9,000 pounds per square inch, if you had a robot that could do the same thing, that would actually hurt Superman. Maybe it wouldn't break his skin, but it would definitely the impact alone would ring his bell, so to speak. And
Now
they
towards
have other characters that can do that. Yeah.
the modern era, have there been any new contrivances, any new inventions for weaknesses for Superman that are worth noting?
Well, there's also another one which is not so much of a contrivance, but it's actually a really clever one, and that is magic. Magic
Huh,
can hurt
I wasn't
Superman.
expecting that.
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
magic can help. Okay. Explain,
yeah.
please.
So, well, it's just because magic doesn't care about your genetic structure or species. It's kind of, it goes after your soul, and it's just really really fun to think the idea that, yeah, someone like Dr. Fate, or Morgana, who's from Scottish lore, could or sorry, not Morgana, Morgan Le Fay from Scottish lore, can cast certain spells that can either constrict or harm or temporarily remove Superman's powers and make him as vulnerable as any normal man. It's quite fun. You even have Mr. Mixixpidlick, who he's a imp from the fifth dimension, and his powers are essentially magic based. He can bend and change reality at his own at a whim. And these are all characters that, again, even though they're things that cause physical threat to Superman, the joy in some of the better written stories is the fact that he defeats them through wits and intelligence and guile, as opposed to just brute strength and force. And those are just the physical aspects of the flaws. Some of the things
Yeah,
that can
yeah.
be
Well, that's what I was interested in too. Is what are some of the personal weaknesses or character flaws in Superman that he has to overcome? Because that's part of this equation when you're dealing with the character. Is that if you write a character who is fully virtuous to the point that they have no moral thing that they have to overcome, then that can be a little bit dull reading it through, because it doesn't ring true to life, where we're all struggling to overcome particular areas, or at least try to strive towards our full potential. We want to see that out of our heroes and characters as well.
Well, a great flaw, especially for aspirational characters and inspirational characters, much like Superman, is the fact that his flaw is sometimes he just doesn't know what exactly to do. He, as we mentioned in the previous interview, Superman knows there's a right way and that there's a moral compass with regards to doing something the right way. But sometimes he might not know exactly what that is, because as powerful as he is and as intelligent as he is not omnipotent to an all-knowing. He can't predict the future, and if he could, he would be a very boring character, because he'd always thwart things before they actually happened. So he's got to figure things out, and that's one aspect of him. Is sometimes he comes to that struggle because great writers give him a very difficult choice, which is like, oh, but we've got this person doing this bad thing, and if I stop him from doing a bad thing. However, if I don't stop him, the repercussions of that bad thing could lead to, and potentially can lead to, a series of very, very good things that would help everyone else on the world. So what do you do? Do you let the bad person do the one bad thing to create better things, or do you stop them and maybe risk these better things never happening as a result of that? Like, those are the quandaries that Superman has to face.
Well,
And that's a very
I find that to be just, I have never thought about that. That is so remarkable what you're saying, because this is an epiphany that just has happened to me. The greater that you increase his powers, it seems to me then that the writers have to, well, they're using him as a vehicle to explore ethics. They're using him as a vehicle to explore dilemmas in our own world, our own morality, and maybe even take Superman because he's so physically strong through a Socratic situation, right, where you have to ask questions and explain and define and then continue to the next step and the next step. That is so interesting that a character that we may sometimes think, oh, well, it's Superman, right? He can just do everything, so it's a boring character. The more power he has, the more that you have to lean into these psychological, ethical issues. That's impressive to me.
I mean, it is. Sadly, we don't get a whole lot of those in the Superman mythos with regards
But
to
you're saying
the
in the
way.
best we do, right?
But in the best we do, yeah. And in fact, there's a very accessible medium for Superman in television that was done in the early '90s called Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. And
Is
this,
that would you say that's the best representation of Superman? What's the best?
that's hard to say. The Fleischer cartoons are probably some of the best for Superman at the time.
Uh-huh.
There's a number of notable moments in the Richard Donner film that is ideal for Superman. I would say the Lois and Clark show is the most interesting and authentic version of Clark Kent.
Sure.
Uh, Not necessarily Superman, because again, they were on a TV budget, so there
And
wasn't a whole
maybe of
lot they could
Lois
do.
as well.
And oh gosh, they nailed Lois. So Deborah Joy Levine is a very notable television writer. She knows how to capture character voices and emotions. And when because I refer to that show is because this is a Clark Kent who follows kind of the logical path of what a man in his position would do, because Superman is an invention of Clark Kent. Because he lived years not being Superman. Like, he's just a farm boy from Kansas, goes to school, studies very hard to become a journalist, has ambitions to work in the big city and expose lies and all that type of stuff. But at the same time, he's this guy who has all these powers. And because he has these powers, he feels like if a tragedy occurs, he can help avert it. And he just has to do that. But he knows that if too many people see him doing these powers as Clark Kent, he's never going to have privacy, which is a very valuable, important aspect with regards to Superman and superheroes in general. Is there's value in privacy. And so he eventually comes up with the idea and of creating Superman. Now, this is something from the very first issue. Like, he's introduced as Clark Kent, and he dons a blue suit and a cape and becomes Superman. He has a secret identity thing. So there's some sort of value with regards to the powers.
Okay, pause there for a minute, Script. I want to key in on something there. So there's been a debate in the last, let's say, 2 months or so, and this is always a debate, but it's apexed a little bit in that Dr. Jordan Peterson has been very critical of anonymity online, specifically on Twitter, specifically on YouTube, on the social medias, and there have been quite a few other people who've been. And I guess this is because Elon Musk purchased Twitter, and then there was the question of, well, what do you do with online anonymity and online aggression, deception, etc.? Superman seems to be a manifestation of that topic, of that controversy, of that conflict. What do you think What do you think the message is out of that in regards to anonymity and how far that should go, privacy, etc.? What does that have to, because that's a precursor to where we are today, where so many people, and you and I are participating in this right now, so many people are online under a name that's different than their given birth name. So many people right now are living in the world under an identity that may not be the identity that was foreseen when they were born. What does the Superman character have to say about that, the narrative?
Well, it's kind of, I found that remark from Dr. Jordan Peterson a little bit ironic, because I first learned of him many, many years ago when I was in college, because my teacher at the time had videotapes of Harvard lectures about characters and archetypes, and Jordan Peterson did a big unit on that when he was a professor over there. So we watched it, and I got to learn about him and his takes on it. And what I find kind of ironic in the fact is that the archetype of the hero, or the hero in disguise, sort of speak, is about responsibility. And when you have the villain in disguise, that's about abuse.
Okay, pause there for a moment. I want to go deeper on that for just, and then
Sure.
don't lose where you were. Is the archetype of the hero in disguise, is that a weakness for the hero, or is it a virtue, or can it be both?
It's actually usually more of a weakness than a virtue. And the reason why it's a weakness is because they are well aware that the actions they are about to take, which is essentially, working with the system, but kind of on the outside aspect of it, could lead to the most obvious trait, which is that if you know who a hero is and you want to take them down and you can't seem to break through their shell psychologically, you then go after the people they love and you
Sure.
threaten them. And that's a
And let's say
very
script. I don't know. I
basic
don't know how much you deal with anonymity online. I don't know, all the connections there, but I would say that's at least partially what you and I are doing right now, is that we're setting up some sort of barrier. And one of the issues that I took with Dr. Jordan Peterson in that area, and let me say that I have great respect for him, and enjoy his lectures immensely. He just put out a documentary not long ago about literacy in the Bible, and I just found that, it was fascinating. But that said, anonymity, to me, it seems that you have to have some degree of anonymity. Everybody does throughout their daily life. So, for example, when I get into a vehicle, I don't put my name and address on the vehicle for everybody to see. And I do that for a purpose, right? I don't want some stranger on the interstate to be able to track down where I live and cause me harm. And it seems to me that that's the same on the internet. It's the same. Okay, for example, if you go get a hotel room, you don't put out, on your front door or on the door of your hotel room, you don't put, by the way, so-and-so is staying in here. And I bet that Dr. Peterson doesn't do that as well. And it seems to me that the Superman character is also dealing with that same ethical quandary about, you want, in an ideal world, sure, you want to reveal yourself, or as best you can, to the world, as best as you can do, considering that sometimes we don't even know our own selves. And yet it's problematic to do so with beyond a certain parameter. And what do you think about it?
Again, it goes back to the irony, because he teaches these aspects, or he taught these aspects prior to his slight change in direction.
Well, I think he's getting fire on Twitter from trolls, right? And eventually you just say enough of it. I think he's wrong.
It goes back to, again, responsibility versus abuse. So, listen, if Jordan Peterson does not live very far from me, I would love to sit down to him and blow his mind on Superman and how it fits into his archetypes lecture, and then also how his assumptions for the character are very wrong, because I've heard him speak on the character, and he speaks of the character pretty much like lazy Hollywood addresses the character.
Right.
But the thing with anonymity, and I'm going to liken something that's actually not too controversial, because I can word around it, is that we have people in our history who had to become anonymous in order to do some good. And one that's very notable with history, and it's also been used in fiction, is the French Maquis during the Second World War. These were resistant fighters who were anonymous and did everything they could to try and save their country. And they were also the inspiration for the group of the same name in Deep Space Nine during the Cardassian conflict in that fiction. Right. But you have a whole bunch of people who had to hide the fact that they were not collaborators like others in their country with this invading force. And they worked together in secret, anonymously, some anonymously in cells with other people, to try and put this foreign element that was corrupting and abusing and killing their brothers and sisters out of their nation. And if they did that in public, or if they did that without the anonymity, they would have been easily found and easily executed, because, again, it's a numbers game. And that's also one of the things with regards to superheroes, is that it is a numbers game. The superhero is the lone warrior against the villain and whatever agents that they have recruited to join them in their own nefarious cause. So that is why anonymity to some degree is important, and there's nothing to say that the villains can't use anonymity as well. I mean, you've got lots of things.
It seems it's like fire, right? Fire can be used to keep you warm. Fire can burn down a village and torture others. You know,
Exactly.
you
To
can
the
take
fact that
any
fire,
idea and turn it into a virtue or to a harm.
exactly. It's anything can be used or abused based on the person that is wielding it, essentially.
And before we pursue, I've got a thought, and I'm afraid we'll lose it if we keep going. So let me drop this thought, and then we'll keep going down this path we're on. That I think is fascinating. I never thought we would. I didn't think this was an avenue we would go down until it just happened organically. And that's my favorite part of having you on the show, is that this occurs now regularly since we're in the second conversation on it. But my thought is that we're all practicing varying degrees of anonymity, because what we're doing every day is we're determining the individuals that that come about. We're determining the resolution with which we want to display our own self to them. So you might think about your significant other. You want to display, ideally, as much of yourself in the highest resolution that you can, because therefore that person can then love you and help you reach a greater potential. Right? It's also dangerous to reveal yourself at that high resolution. So you reserve it for the people who have, ideally, again, the best intent for you. But the salesperson who calls you on the phone, right, and you didn't expect it to be a telemarketer, you don't go in, if you're healthy at all, you don't go into high resolution about who you are and your deepest thoughts and worries and cares. So it seems to me that we're all navigating the resolution with which we want to display ourselves to others in this endeavor you and I are doing. We may not be giving, particular identifiers of ourselves to the audience, and yet at the same time, our conversation is opening up things about us and our thinkings that are dramatically deeper than if you were to know, for example, your height or my height. That seems to me to be superfluous compared to what we're talking about right now. And that may be also what's being relayed in the Superman story, is that you don't have to know that the people in the world of the fiction don't have to know that Superman's name is Clark Kent. That isn't necessarily as truthful as the things that he does, the actions that he takes. Does that make sense?
No, you've actually kind of nailed it, because one of the things that's I find very fascinating with superheroes as I continue to study them, and I always will be studying them because there's always new things to study.
And because they impact people so much, they're worth studying because of that.
They do, but here's the thing that's kind of very interesting with regards to Superman and Batman, is that Superman and Clark Kent behave the exact same way with regards to who they are as a person. The only real difference is that Superman comes into the effect when trouble is on the forefront. So you'll have this conversation between Clark Kent and Lois Lane, where Lois says, "I'm going to go spy on this smuggling ring, and I'm going to get really, really in there. I'm going to, put on a disguise. I'm going to try and infiltrate it." And Clark Kent says, "Lois, I think that's a bad idea, because if you get caught, they could kill you." And she's like, "Oh, Clark, you worry too much." And then she goes and does it. And then she gets caught, and she screams for Superman. Superman comes and saves the day and says, "Hey, Lois, you really shouldn't have done this, because if I wasn't around, they could have killed you." And she's like, "Oh, but Superman, thank you so much." There's no difference to what is actually literally being said to her by the same person in two different sets of clothes. Yet she doesn't recognize it, because, again, it's the spectacle of Superman that blinds her from the fact that she doesn't realize that it's Clark Kent. And there's this beautiful scene in an episode of Lois and Clark where Lois almost discovers Clark's identity when she starts describing Superman, and then she pauses and says, he's a lot like you, Clark." And then he almost has a take like, "Holy crap, did she just figure it out?" And then she's like, "What?" Then she does a double take. It's like, "No, couldn't be." But that's kind of the thing. That's the fun you can have with these characters, is that Clark Kent and Superman have the exact same point of view and the approach to things. And Clark, as his Clark form, is trying to mitigate tragedy when he thinks it's going to be in the near future, especially with Lois, who's so ambitious and so determined to get to the truth and to make sure that the world knows of this egregious action, that she's willing to risk her life for it. And there's a passion there. And that's something that Clark Kent really admires. But at the same time, he knows that it's kind of also a reckless behavior, because people who are doing these things obviously don't want to get caught, and they are willing to kill to do it.
Sure.
And so, yes, we do get the examples, especially in Superman the movie and in a number of comics, where Clark is kind of a clumsy, nervous type of wreck. But that kind of came later. When you take a look at some of the George Reeves Superman episodes, Clark is a very confident. He actually yells at people sometimes when he gets angry, and he's very what's the best word? Ambitious as well with regards to Lois. And they do have a shared friendship, but he's not a pathetic, or doesn't try to present himself as a pathetic person. And Clark Kent really is best when he's not that, where he feels like he's his own man. But the only difference is that he kind of separates a little bit of his humanity when he's as Superman, because he has to present this confident, this assured persona when he's the Man of Steel. But with Clark, his real feelings can kind of come out, where he's like, I'm actually kind of worried about this thing because I care about you, or I've seen this go wrong before. And he's using his Clark Kent personality, the core personality, to sort of remind people that, yeah, just because Superman exists doesn't mean that he's always going to be there to save you. So you shouldn't be, reckless with your lives because there's this guy here. Because even Clark knows he can't be in two places at once, and as much as he would love to, and at the same time, he also knows he can't be abused by the people of Earth as a superpowered babysitter, because there is going to be a lot of people that will want him to do that. There's going to be a lot of people that says, man, Superman, why can't he, rid all the world of nuclear weapons to cite Superman in the quest for peace? And that movie could have been great, because the lesson of that movie is that it's not Superman's place to dictate how the world progresses. That
goes back to the idea that free will exists.
Yep.
That, well, it seems implicit in the argument that consciousness is extremely important, maybe axiomatically important. And I mean, otherwise, why would Superman allow bad decisions to happen? And that plays out the ethical quandary again, right? The theistic issue of how can there be ultimate good and yet there is evil that exists. So there's Superman playing that issue out inside the pages of a comic book and inside the episodes of a TV show or a movie. Again, all back to taking on these very big ideas because you have a very big character in Superman.
Exactly. And to further distinct the behavior of that is, even though Clark is cautious and he likes to, remind Lois and others that you can't risk your lives, the other reason that makes them assume that Clark is cowardly is that when stuff does start to go bad, Clark has to leave and become Superman. Right. So from their perspective, it's like, oh, he just ran away. But the irony is that, no, he's just protecting you and your knowledge that he's Superman, and taking a moment to himself so he can change and come in and save the day that either was instigated by the friends that's trying to uncover the truth, like Lois and Jimmy, or just stop whatever villain of the week has come by, and their carnage is spreading ever closer and closer to the city or to any sort of populated area. And yeah, Clark has to struggle with the fact that he's not always the best at making excuses for where he has to go off to. That's also one of his character flaws, is that he's like, oh, I got to go return this book from the library, or I just realized I have to make a call. And it's like, there's a giant 200-foot robot, walking down Main Street.
Oh, everyday problem script, I gotta go make a run to Target. I've got to stop by Costco. There's a 200-foot robot destroying downtown. Typical everyday. I've got a dentist
appointment or an optometrist appointment, or I promised my tailor I would come in today to make sure the suit he's making me fits right. Like, just he comes up with very silly excuses.
So let's segue, and these weaknesses might be better construed or better defined as constraints that you place upon a character, obstacles that they have to overcome that are then interesting for the audience to watch. Nobody wants to watch perfection play out, because then there's no progress. But let's contrast that now with Batman and Bruce Wayne. You were talking about how Clark Kent and Superman are essentially the same character. That doesn't seem to be the case with Batman and Bruce Wayne. Any thoughts on that and why that might be?
Well, it actually comes down to the fact that Batman's such an interesting character that we as an audience sometimes forget that he's playing roles, but it's the perceptions that he presents that makes us think that he's not the same character. Because Batman is actually a very kind, respectful, caring person. Like he cares about the people of Gotham. That's why he's doing this. Again, he doesn't hate criminals so much that he hunts them in the night and beats them up for his own satisfaction. He's not doing it for himself, although it appears that way in some regards, and in some writers handle it that way, which is I find personally silly. But he's doing this because he is very concerned with other people, and he thinks that they'll deserve a balance between the chaos and order that is normal with everyone. Like, again, you can never have perfect peace because that would essentially be a form of slavery. So there's always going to be some evil, some off balance, or conflict or chaos in your lives. But there's enough, but to make sure that it's to a point where we as individuals can manage. And there's always the saying, the universe never throws anything at you that it doesn't think you can't handle on your own.
Do you think, Script, that both of these characters are anti-nihilism?
Yes,
is that one of the messages?
So. Yeah, because Superman stands in the light and represents it to the people that he fights for. And Batman,
when you say Superman stands in the light, what do you mean?
Well, he's a very brightly colored hero. He doesn't operate in the shadows. He operates at any time of day. But anytime you kind of think of Superman, it's always during the day, standing before the sun.
Anonymous to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. With Batman, he operates in the shadows, but the thing is that he's not something that children will fear, and he's not something that people who have no criminal background would necessarily
some incarnations,
fear.
Right?
In some incarnations, yeah, kids would fear him. Again, that just goes against what Batman is for, because he's not there to scare kids; he's there to scare criminals, and criminals are a very specific group because they're not average people that are just trying to do good by themselves and by others.
So then, do you think that the Christopher Nolan films were too dark?
I think they were too serious, or too
why so serious, right?
Yeah, too predicated on trying to be real as opposed to leaning into the fact. Because here's the problem with realism, and realism is always an issue with young writers and young creatives, regardless of their age. But when you're new to the industry, your angle is, I want to make it seem real, and that's antithetical to films because they're supposed to not be real. The brilliance of movie and media and story is that you're creating a world which is recognizable as real, but is definitely not real, and it's up to you to sell the audience that this is a real world that could exist based on your own talents and skill and imagination, not by manipulating your idea to try and fit within our rules. Because the whole concept of story of one man or one woman standing against an enemy and an antagonist or what have you isn't as always real as we would like to think it to be. Sometimes there's so many other variables involved where someone with greater influence, money, power, what have you, can actually prevent you from fighting back.
Well, and the good thing about film is that it constrains the viewer. So whereas any number of events that occur have just almost infinite number of factors being played into them, whoever is writing, directing, etc., a film, they're looking through that one lens, that one perspective, and it is monovisual, and you've got 90 minutes to relay this story to the audience. And I guess one of your primary concerns in doing so is you're playing a game with the audience. So the audience knows this is not real when they go in, and yet they're willing to play the game with you to treat it as if it is, so long as you play the game well enough that they aren't reminded that this is nonsensical. And as long as you play that game well, and so you might say, well, at the beginning of it, you're talking about this realism issue. At the beginning of the game, if you set out the parameters so that you have more elasticity and disbelief, then the audience will be willing to go with that. But if you start off with something that's very serious, that's going to follow the stringent logical rules of our world, and then you deviate from that, well, the audience will immediately be drawn out the moment that you do it.
Yeah, essentially.
So Batman, tell me about his weaknesses in particular. Very different than Superman weaknesses, and sometimes I think that the best writing for Batman dealing with his weaknesses have to do with psychological issues. Talk to me about what it is that makes Batman weak and vulnerable, and all that's necessary to have a good hero.
Well, for Batman, he's got the easiest types of weaknesses is that he's mortal. He doesn't have superpowers. He's reliant on his skills, his intelligence to get him out of jams. So you've got a lot more to play with. You can put him in extravagant death traps, which is notable for not just some of the comic books, but also for the William Dozier TV series in the 60s. He's got all the flaws.
If you bring up shark repellent right now, Script, you're in trouble.
I mean, I don't have to, but it's brilliant because again, as often as it's referred to that Superman is the Boy Scout, one of the staples of a Boy Scout is to always be prepared, and that's Batman. Right. Batman is always prepared. He spends his days thinking of what crazy thing could a criminal do to me that I would otherwise not expect.
That utility belt's got a lot in it.
Yeah, he would plan it out, and then he would think, okay, so if this is what they did to me, and would most likely be the most extravagant plan ever, he's like, I need to come up with some way to get out of that, or find a way, or build a device that he can equip on himself to get out of that situation, if it should so ever happen. And that's kind of what he does in his off time, in his off hours. But yeah, he's a normal guy. His personal flaw, one of the ones is that, again, he's a man who has lost his family, and for all intents and purposes, he should be traumatized from this. But one of the great messages with regards to Batman is that he refuses to live life as a victim. He is taking an active effort to create a not necessarily justification, but a purpose for him as a result of his parents' death. Like, he's not trying to give his parents' death meaning because it was meaningless, but he's trying to make his life have meaning as a result of that. He is, even though it may never be revealed in his life or even after his death that Batman and Bruce Wayne are one and the same, and the whole reason Batman exists is because a thug with a gun killed his parents. He is trying to live a life where he is not a victim of that. And it goes back to what I mentioned last time, which is that you can't really have a believable hero who is so psychologically damaged that it would really prevent people from acknowledging them as a role model. You then get into the area of the Punisher, which is a Marvel property and similar overlap to regards to with origins of a family being murdered and whatnot by criminals, but one takes it to street level, and it's more about personal revenge at first, and then it becomes obsession, and then it becomes psychological. But for Batman, it can't be, because again, if he makes one slip up and commits the same crime that would have been committed to him, he could go down a rabbit hole that he could never, find his way out of, which is that if you can justify one killing, you can justify any killing. And that's the thing that Batman is most terrified of in his crusade. Because
so do you think he values life to a point that is, would we categorize that as a weakness? Is it a virtue that is unbounded? What would you say about that?
I think he values life, but at the same time, part of his other flaw is that he also values the concept of the legal system, which there's many arguments to be said. Well, why doesn't Batman kill the Joker? And my counter argument to that, and a lot of other writers' counter argument to that is, well, it's the Justice Department. Why aren't they killing the Joker? Because that's their responsibility. That's the responsibility we as a community, we as a municipality have given them. It's like, if this is a state or location with the death penalty, and this man has killed many people and has been tried and convicted, then why isn't the state doing it? And one of the things that the Joker does to circumvent that is he claims insanity, and he makes sure he does things that could be interpreted as insanity. But one thing that I learned growing up is that, well, on the criminal side of things, there's a definition for insanity. On the medical side of things, there isn't. There's just various degrees of mental health.
Right.
And different diagnoses, but nothing is officially insane. And there's a reason for that, is because despite all we know about our bodies and whatnot, we are still in the infancy of discovering everything. And we can do a lot right now.
Absolutely.
We know, we literally know and have more information about how the universe kind of works than we do about the human body, because we've looked up at the stars longer than we have looked within ourselves.
Well, and the complexity, I've told people this before. We walk around with the most impressive, powerful thing residing inside of our skull. And so you might look at a star and think that a star is this magnificent thing. It's huge. It's unfathomably large and powerful, and the energy that emanates from it is, we could go on and on. And yet inside your skull is the most complex thing that we know of in the entire universe. We don't know. I mean, we don't even know how consciousness works at all. We don't know even how to define it. You think you do, and then you start to talk about different types of qualia. People who want to get into that, go ahead and look up qualia and start figuring that one out. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, the complexity that we are is immense. And when I look back 200 years ago, I see people thinking, "Oh, we've learned so much. We are at this stage of history now." And I think that's a repeating occurrence, is that people always kind of see themselves in this place where, we have learned so much and we are so much greater than the past. And then, in 50 to 100 years, people will look back at us and some of our theories and ideas and just say, what a bunch of rubes. How could they have believed that?
And they're perfectly justified in saying so.
Sure. Yeah, we will be that one day. We will be the rural farmers with wagons, or the people sitting around the campfire making
still drinks water out of taps.
Oh yes, guttural noises. That will be us one day in comparison to the future people who look back.
But the one valuable lesson that you're supposed to learn is that whatever time period we are in, we stand on the shoulders of those that had to make terrible sacrifices or choices in order for us to get here. And we may not agree with those choices, but But the thing is that as long as we know what those choices are, and we know what came as a result of them, and we know which direction to go, we can avoid repeating them. And that's why it's very valuable to know history. And another thing that I have said, and even some of my close friends have said, is that the numerical number of the year is irrelevant with regards to what level of progress we should have. There's no reason to say that in 21, 23, we should be progressively better than where we are now, because that's not how it works.
Correct.
The year doesn't justify advancement. It's the culture and what we do with it that justifies it.
Correct. And it needs to be understood. And this is something that is people are failing to understand this in the current generations, is that the default is not improvement. The default is destruction, right? You go out and you take, without sacrifice, without effort, without planning, things fall apart very quickly. And I think that people have gotten used to, there's always power, there's always plumbing, there's running water, there's always a doctor available to me. And there's a disconnect there between what is going into, okay, think about this script, and we're way off topic, but real quick.
Well, I can bring this around back to heroes, but yes, go right ahead.
You walk into Lowe's or Home Depot, okay? Mm-hmm. Every item in that store, every single item is a stroke of genius that somebody in history had and said, this device will allow us to do this. Every aisle is a bit of genius that occurred at some point, and we just take it for granted and say, oh, I need this item for $1.23, or I need this dollar for $15, $15, I'll take it. And we forget that This didn't come into existence except by somebody figuring it out, and our entire world is made of that.
Exactly. Our entire world is made by the choice of an individual to say, I see a problem and I'm going to present an option in an attempt to solve it. And that comes by way of laws, of how we treat each other with behavior, with inventions. That is the entire premise of our species, is how can we solve a problem? And that goes back to heroes. Heroes are basically someone that is commentating on some of the errors that have occurred or abuses that have taken place within society, and saying to themselves, we know this is an error. No one has done anything to try and stop it or prevent it. So I am going to. And I may not know exactly how to do that at this point, but I'm going to figure it out. And that's what Superman is. That's what Batman is. That's what Green Lantern is. That's what all of those characters are, is they're finding a problem and they're trying to come up with a solution as best they can. And it's not an easy solution. And
why do we love to watch that play out, either in a comic book or in a book or in a TV show or in a movie? Why do we love to watch that?
Because it inspires us, and hopefully it gives us one channel to live vicariously through those characters and see them accomplish something. And another part, it can either inspire us to take a moment and think and be like, well, how can I do something like that? Not to that level. Obviously, I'm not encouraging anyone to put on a costume and try and fight the forces of evil, because, I mean, there are other ways to do it, of course. But
right.
I don't want people risking their lives in a arrogant attempt to copy that which we see in fiction. There are other ways you can do it. I'm a big fan of just paying attention to your local municipality and working that way and speaking out that way and encouraging people, whatever you. Not all heroes have to wear capes or masks, but no, we like the idea of just trying to make a change and doing one. And it's again, this goes back to what we said earlier with regards to anonymity. There's lots of people that want to make changes. Some want to do some that they think are bettering the world, and in some cases they could be, and in other cases they aren't. And then others want to do some that benefit just themselves, and that sometimes they'll tell themselves that's going to benefit the world. And that's where you have a conflation between the evil villain and the compelling villain, because the supervillain has to think what they're doing is right, either for them or for the world. And we as an audience have to objectively know that it's wrong. And the moment you try to make them compelling and victims that we should sympathize with is when you lose it, because we can sympathize with how they got to that point, but we should not be allowed to sympathize with the actions that they are taking. And that's why you have to do the distinction, because essentially every villain and hero, they're on the same journey. The only difference is that the villain makes a decision that is most likely for selfish gain, and the hero makes a decision that is for selfless gain. And that's the main distinction that you can kind of argue or rely on when looking at a villain. And it goes down to that thing I said earlier about Batman. If he can justify one murder, he can justify all of them. And for a villain, that's exactly what they do, especially when they think they're trying to do good. And you can cite Thanos in the Marvel Avengers film. He can justify killing half of all existence because he's like, the resources are limited. And then completely ignoring the fact that at least on Earth, we've always been able to do more with less, as demand requires it. There's
what's always funny to me though, Script, is that if you believe that we're all just deterministic beings, if you think that consciousness is an illusion, then Thanos isn't a bad guy. So built into the premise that what Thanos wants to do is wrong and what the villains want to do is wrong is this belief that, and I want to be careful about how I phrase this, but that people are divinely or infinitely valuable, however you want to try to relay that. There's something special about people that's worth preserving. And I think that's missed by some people when they assume that that's just a given when they're reading the story, that the good guy is the good guy and the bad guy is the bad guy. And it's like, what undergirds that? There seems to be something that we're all saying. And that thing that we're all saying is that people matter for some reason.
People matter, and also their actions have to be, carefully examined.
Sure.
And that's the other part too. It's, again, it comes back to like, well, what are they saying versus what are they doing? And that's what superheroes are. What are they doing? Batman doesn't say much unless he's interrogating somebody. And the reason he's interrogating somebody the way he does is because there's a level of urgency in there. He's wanting to save lives. And his dark demeanor is just a presentation and tool to do that, because Batman doesn't speak that way to Jim Gordon. He actually says very complimentary things. I respect you. You're doing this all the time. You're dedicating your life to this. You're a friend. And he may not say it out loud, but he'll think he's like, you're another father figure I didn't get to have growing up because of this city and because there weren't enough cops like you. Like that's Batman at his core. And that's what Bruce Wayne is at his core. But when he goes out in public and he wants to make sure that people don't know that Batman and Bruce Wayne are one the same, and there's no reason for them to anyways, but he's doubling down on that. Yeah, he'll start dating beautiful models or, make presentations about latest new inventions or things that Wayne Enterprises is doing and not really know how it works, but, shrug it off and just be like this affable type of guy who, mind you, presents to the world. And here's an interesting consistency. Bruce Wayne, everyone knows his story that his parents were murdered, but Bruce Wayne as the billionaire playboy doesn't act like a person who's going on activist campaigns talking about how terrible Gotham City is. He's trying to live a great life. And people are actually forgetting the fact that his parents were murdered in front of him because he's having fun. He's going on parties, yachts. He's donating money to various charities and causes. He's heading a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that employs thousands of people. He's trying to live the best life he can, or at least present himself as living the best life he can to the world. And so even as a billionaire who has every reason to justify being a victim, he's not presenting that to the world. And that's kind of a consistency with Bruce Wayne. And as a result of Batman, he's not going on Oprah saying, my parents were murdered. How can I ever move on with all my billions of dollars? Like, he's not doing like a Kim Kardashian type of thing, or anything of that nature. He is the defiance. He is the, what I love about Batman is that he's basically saying, you know what, we're all going to get taken advantage of or victimized by some time. You can either live as a victim or you can do something about it and move on and live the best life you can. And that's what Batman does. And that's why you can play around with him being tortured that he lost his parents, but it can't be a debilitating thing because then he can never be effective as Batman. And
well, Script, I think that's a great place to end our current conversation. That's right. We'll come back again, but I think that has some meaning that we can all extract in our own lives. We all go through things. Of course, many of us go through things that are much harder than others, but none of us gets out of this life alive, right? We all have to, we're all mortal, and we all have major issues that constrain us. We only have so many hours in a day. We only have so many areas in which we can have expertise. And there are going to be bad things that happen to us, often because we acted stupidly, and then sometimes because others acted in a way that did not take us into consideration in the way that they should have. However, just like Batman, and maybe that's why Batman resonates, we cannot sit in the shadow of injustice. We cannot sit and be victims forever, because that is a place that we do not wish to be in the long term. There's a better way to go, and we can affect change in the future. We just need to do it in the right ways. Script, where can people find you on this great, big, beautiful web out there?
You can find me on Twitter at ScriptDoctorPhD. I do have a YouTube channel. It's in the weird hiatus part right now, but it will be coming back as soon as some time frees up. But if you do want to
Phoenix.
Like the Phoenix, but if you do want to read some of my reviews and commentary and things of that nature, I set up a Patreon because it is more of a text-based program. And you can swing on over there. I have a couple of free articles to wet your whistle, so to speak. And if you enjoy that, I'd very much appreciate you signing up for a number of very fun and affordable tiers where I review film, television show, and I even have essays with regards to characters, stories, the writing process. And I actually might do something in the future, like everything you think you know about Batman might not be correct, because it's not wrong. It just might not be correct in the future.
Awesome. All right, folks, descriptions down below. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.